Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today for today's webinar, Rebuilding Confidence, Best Practices for Structural Restoration and Safety. And again, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Millie Ventura. I'm the Business Development Manager for the Palm Beach region here at Castle Group. I'm just gonna move to the next slide. Joining us today is Misha. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce your last name, but we're gonna get to that.
Don't.
President, there you go. President of M2E, Jeremy Rafalov, President of Care Construction, and James LaGreca, CEO of LG Consultants. We're also supported behind the scenes by Regan Merrick, Senior Business Development Manager for Broward, and Sully Encalada, Business Development Manager for the Miami region.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you
Good
for
afternoon,
joining.
everyone.
Before we dive in, I encourage everyone to take part in today's conversation. You'll see instructions on your screen on how to submit your questions in the chat. Sully and Regan are going to be monitoring the chat behind the scenes. We're going to try to hold off all questions to the end because we did get a lot of questions during registration. Thank you all again for submitting those ahead of time. So before we begin, I'd like to have the panel introduce themselves. I'm going to remove the slides so that we can be on the screen. If you want to proceed, Misha.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Misha, and as Millie said, my last name is unpronounceable. I'm the president and founder of M2E Consulting Engineers. We're a full-service engineering firm specializing in structural and concrete restoration and representing condominium association, whether as their engineer of record or supporting their construction litigation.
Yeah, Jeremy.
Jeremy Raffaella, owner of Care Construction. We're a full-service concrete restoration, roofing, painting, waterproofing contractor, specialized in the Tri-Counties, family-owned business for third generation, and we appreciate everybody being here today.
Thank you, James.
Hi, guys. My name is James LaGreca. I'm the founder and CEO of LG Consultants, also known as LGC. We are an owner representation project management firm, and we manage large-scale capital improvement projects for condominium associations and homeowner associations.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, we did have a lot of questions that were submitted. So I'm going to get started with some of those questions and then just have an open conversation. So Misha, how have recent events in Florida and other coastal areas reshaped the approach to building safety and restoration? And what are the biggest misconceptions boards still have about milestone inspections and structural integrity reserve studies?
Well, I think that rehashing at this level what the Senate bill meant and what it was intended to do is kind of counterproductive. Everybody knows that the Senate bill in its various iterations was passed after the events in Surfside, tragic event in Surfside. It was modified several times, and essentially the latest modifications are more a way of trying to find a solution for how to fund those now mandated inspections and certifications. The biggest misconception is, there's several of them. And misconception number one is that the bill is going to go away. We are still presented with condominium associations who somehow believe that it's going to be either diluted or somehow revoked or go away. I had the pleasure and the honor to actually presenting at various presentations and conferences with the two senators who passed it. Whenever somebody mentions something like that, Senator Rizzo stands up and he says, I lost 120 constituents the last time that this was diluted or tried not to be enforced. Do you want me to lose several more for you to save a couple of bucks? And the room goes quiet. So it's not going to go away. So the first misconception, it's not going to go away. There is accommodation made in the sense of how the financing is going to occur, which we're in the latest iteration. You can contact your attorneys and your management company about that. And also it has been postponed somewhat. Therefore, the deadlines have been moved. The fact that the deadlines have been moved, that's misconception number two, is that it's going to be okay to keep hoping that they're going to be moved. I hope your community is not going to be eventually faced with either being pronounced a unsafe structure or being slapped with heavy daily fines by your authority having jurisdiction, because at some point they will need to enforce this. And what we see the most lately, and I spoke about it several times, is that association basically board number one, who now got the postponement until December of next year, goes like, woof, that's not going to be my problem. Hands up. No assessment during the time on the board is going to be your problem, Peter, because you're going to be on the board after me. I encourage people to realize that this is not going to go away and that they need to deal with it, whichever way they need to deal. Misconception number 3, and I'm going to shut up after that, is that it's expensive and that you need to do it all at the same time. You do not. The assessment done by an engineer is going to say what needs to be done, but you can do that in phases while maintaining the structural integrity of the building itself, and at the same time phasing it in, I'm going to say, bites that are physically and financially feasible. That's done by the engineer that actually does the assessment initially. Therefore, this is not something that you need to do all the same time. And when done properly, it's something that has to be done.
Thank you. And because you mentioned timeline, and this was a question that was brought up by Gail and Ernest, I'm not going to mention last names, but what is timelines or benchmarks that associations should be aware of to remain compliant? And is there a grace period for SIRS work?
Let's separate SIRS and a milestone. SIRS is just a subset of calculation that actually essentially was the way that the legislation forced the boards to actually put some money aside in order to address at least the structural issues of the building, because customarily boards would postpone those or basically say no reserve, whenever we need, we'll do an assessment, right? Well, now that is not negotiable. It needs to be segregated. It needs to be segregated, I believe, by December of next year. In the meantime, the actual SIRS report has to be published so that there is some time to start funding it over time. And that's the first thing you need to know. That SIRS will also reveal similar, but like I'm going to say like a milestone light, what the expected life expectancy is of your key structural element and how you need to segregate money in order to address those over time.
Got it. And then also I had a question from Jean. Is it mandatory to hire a structural engineer to prove you're addressing the building structure?
That's part of the dilution. Initially, it was a structural engineer. It has moved to structural engineer and architect, and now we're at, as long as it's done under the tutelage and supervision of a structural engineer. I must warn condominiums that are threshold buildings, and I'm not going to be the geek, which I am on this panel. What is a threshold building? Essentially, if your building is taller than 3 stories and over a certain square footage, not only do you need to have your milestone, but if you're a threshold building, the phase 2, if needed, which is after the phase 1, which is the visual inspection, the phase 2 is the actual work to be done, needs to be done by an engineer who has not only a structural engineer license, but a threshold engineer license, special inspector. So those are specialized inspections. Be sure when you hire engineers that he or she has the necessary registration to do that.
Thank you. So Jeremy, can you tell me what are the warning signs or red flags that managers should be and boards should look for in an aging structure?
So yeah, so you have usually spalling concrete, right? So you'll see a big crack in your building. You'll have some exposure rebar. Depending if your building is a post-tension or not, you'll see some of their anchor caps and the edge will start rusting out. Especially the buildings that are closer onto the water, you'll probably have more structural damage overall from more properties that are inland, like stucco, painting. A lot of people think, well, I painted my building 7, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, it looks great. Well, a lot of people don't realize when you touch that building, especially when you're on the ocean, those buildings get very chalky. And you're going to start seeing, okay, well, great. Well, the building looks good from the outside, but as soon as we start touching the building, it starts chalking. So those are things that you guys can look for in the garage. Again, if you see spalling concrete, you see some beam repairs. Another thing is your roofing project, right? So out of sight, out of mind. Like majority of these managers and unit owners, they're barely on the roofs. But you know, especially after you're doing a concrete restoration project in theory, right? Nobody comes and really checks the roof afterwards, right? You're talking about whether if you don't have a parapet wall, so you're talking about heavy weights and beams that are sitting on that roof. You're talking about a lot of traffic on that roof. So those things, like, you know, again, that's why we strongly suggest to do like an annual inspection on your building. You know, if you see something deficiently right away, you know, take some pictures, mention to the board. Obviously, that's where you get Misha and James involved and say, hey, you know, we have some issues. We want to take a closer look. You know, those type of things, usually what we try to look for. So again, it's really, right now it's tough, right? A lot of people don't have the funds, right? We're going through still through COVID times, believe it or not, where boards are very tight and now they have these special assessments and they're trying to really, you know, stretch that dollar for as long as I can. So sometimes people do tend to turn a blind eye. I'm like, that doesn't look so bad. But that small little repair that can cost the association $4,000 or $3,000 eventually can turn into a big project. So those type of things is something that they should look out for.
Sure, and we also recommend having roofing contracts in place so that they are monitored and inspected annually, as you said.
Yes.
So also, what is the best practices for selecting a qualified restoration contractor?
Well,
That's a James question.
Yeah.
Okay.
We will.
James, would you like to address that?
Sure, absolutely. Well, just like when you're selecting any vendor, you want to vet them, right? You want to understand how long have they been in business? How many projects of similar scope, size, and complexity have they performed? More importantly, how many have they performed successfully, right? What's the feedback that we can get from the clients? And not just the board of directors and some random residents, but management, because management is dealing with them all the time. Another entity that you should be inquiring with regarding contractor performance is your design professional, right? M2E is an engineer or an architect, whoever is working directly with that contractor, and your owner rep, of course, whoever is working directly with that contractor and seeing performance or lack thereof is going to have a really good insight on a good, they'll have a good beat on whether or not that contractor performed well. And then last but not least, ask the association's attorney. These attorneys work with a lot of properties and they write contracts for a lot of projects with a lot of contractors. And if anybody is going to know whether or not a contractor has been naughty, it's going to be the attorney, because they're going to hear about it. Now, it's not about what they heard, it's about what they didn't hear. If the attorney didn't hear anything about that contractor, then you know what? That's a good thing, right? So that's another way to do it. But as far as the selection process goes, like any selection process, it should be a competitive bid process where you actually generate a formal request for proposal. You attach all the bid documents and specifications, which are generated from the engineer, and you send that out to the market to these qualified contractors that have been previously vetted. Once those bids come in, you need to analyze them, level them, making sure they're apples to apples, and of course, negotiating them where you should be negotiating, and then ultimately presenting that to the decision makers, which is the board of directors, so they can make a well-informed decision, right? And if it's done in an open board meeting, as it should be, the community could and should feel comfortable with the board's decision because they could see that their decision was based on well-vetted information, right? Which started with the vetting process with the various contractors and ultimately ended up with an analysis/negotiation. Once that contractor is selected, then obviously you start the contract negotiation process and work in tandem with legal counsel to make sure that you have an ironclad contract, as I like to call it, preferably favoring the client. No offense, Jeremy, but that's what we
No, again, I'm going to jump on, even though that was my question, you answered it great, but even though to get it even a step further, like, again, we're seeing it from another as a competitor. Like, we always look at ourselves, okay, how can we as Care Construction better ourselves as a company? How do we make ourselves stand out, right? Everyone's like, what makes you different, right? Everyone, every single board asks that question all the time. Communication is very key too, right? Mm-hmm. You have contractors, they can be the best contractors, they can perform work very well, but when it comes to communication to the clientele, a lot of these contractors, they mishaps. Insurances, right? We've seen it also where they have insurance, but are they certified to go to a high-rise building? Yes, we have general liability insurance and umbrella policy, but what is your height limit? Can you go up to 25 stories? Is it only 15 stories? Because what happens? You're going to have that insurance policy, and God forbid, 222, whoever that contractor is, they have an issue, and now the association wants to go after their insurance, but the height restriction was only, 15 stories high. Another thing that we as contractors are seeing that we tried to outline is, especially now, it's the new fad where a lot of engineering firms are doing lump sums, right? Lump sum the building. Give me a paint spray, lump sum. Now, what happens if, and Misha's laughing because it's the truth, what happens if the contractor doesn't know how to measure a building? And we're bidding at 40,000 square feet to paint the building, and contractor B is at 27,000. Well, of course, they're going to say, well, Jeremy, we love you as a contractor, but we have a price differential. And that's where we step in. And when we submit our bids, we give a quantity of base what our lump sum is. So when the engineer does do the reverse and sees, okay, well, company A, B, and C, everyone's numbers are aligned. Okay, we can go with that. We can make now a better decision making on the contractor versus, all right, well, Care Construction has 40,000 square feet and contractor B has 27,000 square feet. The association says, well, that's great. We're saving money. Well, is that going to be a change order, right? Are we going to get a change order because the quantities are different? And that's where you get into that heated battle that we try to avoid. So we really try to be as open-ended as possible. We share our quantities with the engineering firm when we submit our bids, because this way they can do their homework and making sure that all the other contractors are on the same playing field.
Jeremy, and I want to thank you. Jeremy, I want to thank you also for speaking about the insurance requirements, because the certificate of insurance doesn't list the height requirements. So
No.
it's the manager's job to call the insurance and say, hey, are there exclusions in this insurance? And what is the height requirement? What's the insurance on the height? So very important to bring that up. Thank you.
I wanted just to underline two things, and the segue to both what James and Jeremy said. James mentioned the apples to apples part of the bid process, and his office is very good at doing that, whether they are qualifying engineers or contractor. Inexperienced owners reps would actually just look what the bottom line is and just do a spreadsheet comparison with only the last line being underlined. That's one thing. The second thing is, for the record, we don't do lump sum projects.
That's why I didn't say your name.
And it's very simple, because that's based on the assumption that there is a perfect set of drawings and there is a perfect contractor who's going to do it. And as we all know, nobody's perfect in the life, except maybe the wives and the husbands of the people except the wives and the husbands of the people on this call. So I'm saying yes, qualifying and being able to do it apples to apples is crucial. And talk to your design professionals, because sometimes we're put in a position where we do pre-qualify together with the owner certain contractors, and I'm going to say it for the record, there is contractors that we will not work with because of their past performance. And if a member of the board really pushes them, we will either cede by saying that we prefer not to be involved in the project, or we will explain to them the actual history of what happened. If they still want to deal with them, it's very rare, by the way. I don't even remember that happened, but that's dangerous for the community. And we saw that. We saw last moment, and actually James and I were talking about a project way back when Earth was young, when we were where there was 12 contractors that were asked to build. Which is absurd, because it's impossible to get that many of them. And then at the last moment, on the day of the walkthrough, the property manager added a quote-unquote friendly contractor to the bid, which for us meant that's not going to happen.
Well, even Millie, even to step on that, like as owners of our companies for LGC and from M2E, it's like it's also about us selecting what is the good clientele for us as well. Like again, there is properties that we were on the finalist, and it was a $7 to $12 million project, and we walked away because we realized that the board won't listen to the engineering firm because they know best, because one of the board members is an engineer back in who knows where, as
And I
well
can do
as,
it for $2.
and I can do it for cheaper, and they start squeezing you, and it's like, it's just not an environment. Obviously, our goal is to get in and to get out. Misha's job is to make sure the building is safe, and LGC's is to make sure that the project is going smoothly, on time, and on budget. But when you have these board members that try to dictate what we need to do, as we're experts, it's something that we breathe and live in every single day, that's where we say thank you so much, but this project's not for us. And they're shocked because, now back in the day, board members had a lot of power because there wasn't so much work. Now there's so much abundance of work that we have the privilege, I want to say thank you, but no thank you.
Yeah. Well, and that brings me to James. How do boards prepare, like, emotionally and financially for these large projects? These type of projects could be in the millions. So how should they prepare financially and operationally?
Well, I say this all the time, and for anyone who has been on one of these panel discussions with me or attended one of the classes that we provide, you'll hear me say scope definition is the most important part of preparing for any given project. If you don't properly define the scope of work with a high level of certainty, it is impossible to predict the future when it comes to the financial and the timing components. And those are the only three components that exist, right? Scope, time, and money, and they're all directly correlated. So if you're anticipating the project to be, yay big for X amount of dollars and X amount of time, but it turns out to be twice as large, I don't care if you have 20, 30, 40% contingency. It's not going to be enough to cover the 100% increase in scope that you aren't planning for. So my message to the communities would be, don't be cheap in the beginning with your professionals. Hire the right professionals and let them do their job. Know what you don't know. Allow the professionals to profess. Don't handcuff your engineers and tell them, oh, we don't want to spend money on a 20% or a 30% inspection or sampling. We only want to go with 5 or 10%. That's the wrong move, because the smaller the sampling of inspection, the more likely it is that the engineer is going to miss their mark when it comes to this scope definition that I'm referring to. Because they're the first line of defense, so to speak, when it comes to queuing up the work. Once the work is defined and the bid docs and specs and details and drawings are all produced, if they're fully capturing the scope, and then that's the scope that goes out to the market, when you get those bids and you level and analyze and ultimately select, you should be very close to hitting your mark. And the margin of error, which is your concealed conditions, unforeseen conditions, scope creep, etc., that should nestle nicely into your 20% contingency if and only if the scope was properly defined or adequately defined out of the gate. And if it wasn't, like I said, it doesn't matter if you have 100% contingency. You're going to miss your mark. Let the professionals do their thing. Let them walk you through the planning and pre-con process properly and thoroughly. Just because planning and pre-con doesn't necessarily have tangible outcomes does not mean that valuable work is not taking place. And that's the biggest challenge for us as owner reps when it comes to managing the expectations of the clients and communities we represent, because they fail to realize the importance in what I'm talking about right now, and they fail to realize the value in professional services. And it's the biggest problem in the industry, in my opinion.
So that leads me to my next question. What is the best way to establish a clearly defined scope for these types of projects?
Okay, well, for starters, go ahead, Misha.
First, you need to select who is going to do the scope before you have a scope. And depending on what is the sequence of how you do your hires, it could be attorney, owner rep, engineer, attorney, engineer, owner rep, whichever way, you would actually be put in a position as a board to equate or essentially competitively bid the same way that your contractor or design professionals, which on our behalf always brings us to the fact that do you, similar to what Jeremy says, do you give the right amount of hours that needs to for the job, or the minimum amount of hours so that you know that there will be scope creep? And thankfully, James actually does the homework of reconciling the engineers the same way he reconciles contractors. And he actually looks at the estimated amount of time that is needed to be done. And when he compares that, then you can compare your engineers apples to apples. The second thing is, please check the certifications and the track record of the engineers and professionals you're hiring. As I said, first and foremost, the easier one, which is licensing and insurance. But then there's a specific certification, which I just mentioned previously, as to whether do they have the certification to actually certify the work once that the work has been scoped. And finally, what, like James is saying, do not be lazy, whether directly or through your owner rep, interview and see what the track record is. I just want to mention one thing. We say this often: price is what you pay, value is what you receive, and they don't necessarily coincide. We are constantly faced, and I'm sure that so is James as well as Jeremy, that cheaper is the only way I can go because my community and so forth. The design professional fees, as well as owner repping fees, are an order of magnitude less than cost of work. And you can save only on one of those. Which one should you choose to save on? A properly scoped work because you paid the right professional to scope it and manage it, or an out of control work because you chose to save on the engineers and owner rep? It's your choice.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Thank you for that. And then that brings me to the next question, Misha. So what if the board ignores the fact that something needs to be done, as long as it can be pushed back to the next board?
There is a red it's a red line or line in the sand, or it could be a red line in the sand. If it's safety, it's not negotiable. We'll step away. In other words, there is things that are not negotiable. The building has to be safe. We have an obligation as professionals and licensed engineers to report if a building is unsafe and what it would take for it to be safe or to be safe to be occupied. So if we find that something is an imminent failure mode, which, God forbid, Surfside experience, right? We would report it, and essentially it would be up to the authority having jurisdiction to either pronounce it an unsafe structure or make them comply. I will repeat this. This is an extreme situation, and I'm not an alarmist. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that there is a way of remedying structurally problematic issues without demolishing the whole building or even doing the entire restoration at the same time. You actually remedy that so that bad things don't happen while you continue scoping the work, start doing the repair, and phase it. But the point is, to a blunt answer to your question is that if they refuse, they need to find another engineer.
Thank you
by
for
the
that.
way, the sad part is that they actually find it.
Yeah, because they're going based on
This is
price.
true.
They're going to hire someone just to go for what they want. All right, this is our agenda. We're going to find someone to pay a little bit of money. Especially now, Misha, right? You're finding, again, same in our world, we're finding a lot of new contractors are coming up and they need to start their revenue and start to make money. So they're willing to sign their names on a piece of paper to get their name out there. So it's hard.
Yeah. The language that we heard was, can you certify our building for $5,000? I said, ma'am, sir, I didn't even see your building. Oh, bye. Thank you. We'll find somebody who will. Okay.
Well, that brings me to the next question from someone named Jenny. She wanted to know, should a balcony restoration be done by someone without an engineering license?
What?
Of course. It's highly recommended. No.
And then an unlicensed contractor to do the work,
Yeah.
and the president of the board as an owner rep. That would be kind of the ideal combination, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. So, Misha, how should boards prepare for their first or their next milestone inspection?
We we properly scope the work. So we have unfortunately seen situations where, remember, before this milestone, it was 40 years and 10 years thereafter. And we were called for 10 years thereafter, and we found that there is more work to be done than at the 40 because they skipped on what was supposed to be done in the 40, and somebody signed the magic letter. We saw literally, I'm not making this up, rebar being painted white so that you wouldn't see that it's actually spalling. And we go, that's a problem. And they go, well, the previous contractor engineer were fine and they signed the letter. And you are an alarmist. Okay. No, we're not. We're concerned about the safety and health of your community and the health of your building. A building is not different than a human body. You maintain it, it will last forever. You don't maintain it, will have a heart attack. So the best preparation is default to your good professionals. James is right in that. At the end of the day, don't be afraid to ask the professionals to help you. And I used to have a partner who didn't like to go to the doctor because he says every time I go there, he tells me that something is wrong with me. So I prefer not to go because I know that I'm healthy-ish, and that makes me feel good. A lot of boards have that kind of mentality. If I go to the engineer, he's going to find something wrong. Well, go to the right engineer, and if there is nothing wrong, he will tell you there is nothing wrong. Have a nice day.
Right. Jeremy, so how can associations build a proactive maintenance plan that supports structural longevity?
So, I mean, for once, right, you have, for instance, let's go from top to bottom. You have your roof, right? A lot of people don't understand. It's a little bit of misconception where they think, well, we have a brand new roof. We have a 20-year warranty. We're good for 20 years, right? A lot of people don't read in that fine print that, well, if you don't have a maintenance program in place, that warranty is null and voided, right? 100%. And even furthermore, to get into, and that's where, again, where Misha and James get involved when you're doing your roofing project, is a lot of associations, again, unfortunately, it's the truth, where they go for the least expensive option. Like, for instance, if you're doing a flat roof, right, it's highly recommended to do a tapered system, right? Slope that water towards a drain so you get the longevity on that roofing project. But they're willing to save, they want to save that $100,000. So they say, well, not so much. Well, again, people don't read in the fine scope. If you have a modified bitumen built-up roofing system, right, and it's bare flat, and you guys have a 20-year warranty, right, and it's not a ponding water spec, and you guys have an issue with that roof, your warranty is null and void in that area. Even on an insurance standpoint, right? Now, a couple of years ago, we had that strong push. Well, your roof is 15 years old. You need to put a brand new roof. Well, we saved some of our clients from having to replace the roof. Why? Because they had a yearly inspection from us to document that the roof is in great condition. The roof is in great condition. The roof is in great condition. So annual inspection of the roof, obviously at least annual. If you can do semi, that's great, especially before the storm. You want to make sure even your maintenance people that can do it, from whether it's Castles, after management side, go ahead and check the roof before the storm. Make sure there's no screws. Make sure the drains there's no leaves around the drains or debris. When you're doing your painting project, right? Don't think because you have a 10-year warranty that you don't need to paint your building in 7 years. Those type of things, and budget for it, right? We're doing a project right now where we're going to give the association a Sika Roof Pro, which is a waterproofing system for 20 years. And they said, well, I don't think that's the right way. Let's go with a lesser expensive. Well, let us engineer value that project, right? You're doing your reserve studies. Now, the more longly you have use of your product, that means the more reserves gets to be stretched out. So the question the board needs to ask themselves, well, are we going to spend a little bit more money so we can have a longer reserve time for that project? So it's those things. Sometimes it's better to spend the money up front. But the main issue that I'm sure Misha and James have heard many times, unfortunately, and I don't mean any disrespect to anybody that's on this call right now, well, we're going to die in 15 years, so it's not our problem. Let the next board deal with it.
We hear that a lot.
By the way, talking about the skin of the building, when we teach on the CUs, the thing that I like to remind people is for for an equal amount of surface, $1 of paint, right, to repaint it. $10 if the stucco is affected, $100 if the concrete below it is affected. So do repaint your building as often as you can afford it, because that protects the stucco that is 10 times more expensive, which then protects the concrete that is 100 times more. Think about it in those things. There is nothing wrong. The building looks good. Like Jeremy said, just pass your hand, and if it's chalking, no, it's not. And we live in the most aggressive environment there is, because we have water on the east, which is the ocean, water on the west, which is the Everglades, water below us, which is the aquifer, and water above us when there is rain and hurricanes. And that is mixed with salty air. So, yay.
Yeah, and also, Jeremy, I want to thank you for bringing up, that you didn't need to be careful how you void guarantees. For example, if you're doing your balconies and, you set down waterproofing, owner should not be putting tiles on top of that waterproofing, because you're going to void the warranty on the waterproofing. So just things like that get missed, right?
Yes.
So just be conscious. Speak with your property management professionals and with your experts to find out what can lead to an exclusion or voiding your guarantee.
Back in the day, and again, I know I'm the youngest one on the panel, but back in Misha's and James' days, I remember when I was with my grandfather when I was like
when T-Rexes roamed the earth.
Yeah.
Thank you for not including me, even though I'm past 50, but thank you for that.
Women always age less, so you're okay. But I remember when there was AstroTurf, I used to go as a kid with my dad on the jobs, and you see AstroTurf, and again, Misha shaking his head. That was just a change order, and when a contractor saw that, they're like, oh, there's saliva, and they see that we're going to make good money because that moisture gets trapped in there. And that's why the right engineering firms are strongly against putting tiles back. Yes, there are waterproofing systems you can, but the great thing about having waterproofing on your balconies is that if you have an issue and you have the waterproofing, it's an easy fix. It can be addressed right away. Versus having tiles, we don't know what's there, especially when you're dealing with PT cables, right? You have people like, oh, it's a PT cable building. The owner of that unit doesn't let the contractor know. All of a sudden, they're chipping out the old mortar and thin set, and all of a sudden, pop. And again, it's those type of things that people really need to look out for.
And there's so many aesthetically pleasing weatherproofing options now, right? Like it's not like it's just a lather of paint. Like they make them really pretty. They look like tile. So,
yes, that is true.
Yeah. All right. So James, I have a question from Dulce, who sent in her question via the registration. What is the best way to establish adequate budgets and schedules for these types of projects? And can you speak a little bit about contingencies?
Absolutely. Well, like I mentioned earlier, you can't establish a budget or a schedule if you didn't clearly define your scope of work. So I hope that is, something that this person takes into consideration. But as far as breaking the budget down is concerned, you're going to have three primary categories. You'll have your soft costs, your hard costs, and your contingencies. The soft costs are going to cover all your professional fees, permits, insurance, administrative fees, legal fees, maybe additional security, maybe additional valet, all depends on the job, right? But you got to really think about what are all the things that we're going to need in order to bring this project to fruition. It's not just your owner rep, your engineer, and your contractor. It's legal, it's expediting, it's testing, it's security, and so on. And so I can go on and on. So the soft cost section of the budget tends to be very robust if it's written properly.
Okay.
So you need to understand the categories and then, of course, the line items within those categories. Yeah.
So, Misha.
Millie, you had a question?
I'm sorry?
Your bandwidth is bad, James.
Your bandwidth is bad, James. Yeah.
I didn't know if it was okay. Bad connection. Okay, how about now?
We got you.
Is it still bad? Okay. Sorry, I don't know what the last thing you heard me say was.
It's bad-ish. No, we heard you. It's just the picture was.
Okay, gotcha. But anyway, real quick on that. So once your soft costs are established, then you need to deal with your hard costs. And like I mentioned earlier, your hard costs are only your budgets for your hard costs are only as good as your scope being defined. You also want to take into consideration what I call, maybe collateral scope or ancillary scope that you may need to take into consideration when performing the required scope. Right. And that's going to help you build the hard cost section. Regarding your contingencies, if your scope is adequately defined and it's a restoration project, I would always recommend 20% contingency. If it's not a restoration project and it's a beautification project and it's clearly defined and adequately defined, you can go with 10%. But on restoration, it's 20% all day long. At a minimum, and only if the scope is adequately defined.
I'd like to add also a multidisciplinary aspect of concrete restorations. We are a full service engineering company, so we have all the disciplines in-house. Structural, MEP, civil, and everything else. But typically, when you talk about restoration, once that you touch, let's say, a deck or something like that, there is always electrical and mechanical that is being disturbed by it. And there is sometimes an illusion that those will just go away. Think about anything that is not steel and concrete. Think about irrigation, think about plumbing and drainage pipes and stuff like that. When we prepare the scope of such things, because we have all disciplines in-house, we actually scope that and explain to the client that the reason why our fees are what they are is because they involve all those disciplines as well. Because we're often faced with the fact that, Peter, Paul, and Mary Engineering did the scoping, but the MEP is missing. Would you just do the MEP on this and then take it over? No, we can't, because taking as the engineer that inherits something, we are responsible for the whole kit and caboodle.
And I'd like to add one more thing regarding budgets, if I can. And I didn't touch on scheduling, so I'll touch on that real quick. But when it comes to budgeting or approach to budgeting, if it's a need project, you're going to build your budget in one way. If it's a want project, you actually build the budget in a completely opposite fashion, right? So needs and wants have completely different approaches. If it's a project that you need to do, which is restoration, repair, or replacement, you can't set a financial threshold of pain and say, I only want to spend $50,000 on my roof, as an example. We don't dictate the cost of the restoration, repair, or replacement. You know what does? The restoration, repair, or replacement dictates the cost. Getting best value by taking you through that process, that methodical process that we talk about regarding the planning and pre-construction, that's what will get you best value. But at the end of the day, the cost of the work is the cost of the work. So the way you build a budget is from the bottom up. What we see time and time again is that boards go to the communities prematurely with numbers when those numbers are not actually from the market. And they don't include all those soft costs. They don't include all the other things that Misha was talking about, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing that might be affected during a concrete restoration project. And they think that the budget's only $4 million, when in fact it should have been $8 million. And they're right out of the gate, they're destined for financial failure. So you have to gather all your data by identifying the professionals, developing the various scopes of work, going out to the market, collecting all the bids from all the appropriate contractors. And now you have real valuable data, which then you plug into your budget and you build it from the bottom up, and then you add your contingency. With a beautification project, completely opposite. You can control what you spend. If you say, I only want to spend a nickel in my lobby, you can spend a nickel. You won't get much, but you can do it. You can say, I want to spend $100,000 on a lobby beautification project. You take 10% off the top for contingency, maybe another 15% for your professionals. And what you have left remaining is $75,000 for hard cost construction. And you give that directive to the design professional, your architect, interior designer, and you tell them to design with that number in mind. Now, of course, making sure that they don't go off the rails from a design perspective. That's part of the owner rep's job, is to pull the design reins back, as I like to say. But those are your two approaches, right? You either build it from the bottom up, or you build it from the top down by setting that financial threshold of pain. And then you have hybrids, which is a little bit of a combination of two, which I won't get into. Scheduling is really, the pre-con schedule is what we write all the time. We identify every single task that must be performed prior to commencement of construction. It gives the community a really good idea of what they're up against timing wise before you put a shovel in the ground. But when it comes to the scheduling for the construction, we lean on the contractor. It's their means and methods. It's their approach. And their schedule is only as good as the scope of work that was created. Because if they're timing an inadequate scope, of course they're not going to hit their timing mark.
And a lot of
Thank you.
unforeseens, right? Too.
Of
Like for
course.
instance, the project that we're working with you guys right now, Advantage View, right? We're doing a perfect example. We're doing work underneath the pool deck, and we found electrical conduit and water lines embedded in the concrete between the slab. And there was no way of us knowing. All of a sudden, the guys are chipping, and all of a sudden, Maria gets the call, calls me, Jeremy, we got water in the building. I said, how do we have the building? We're just again, water, the piping is in the slab, and but those are the unforeseen things that nobody can know. And that's where the change orders, unfortunately, nobody wants to hear the words. The change orders only happen when you don't have the right engineering firm and the right owner's rep to give the right expectation to the clientele. The clientele wants to pay $500,000, $2 million. So they tell the engineer, okay, they call Misha, hey, Misha, this is what we spend. Misha's like, thank you very much, goodbye. They'll find that guy from the Joe and the Schmo on the street, go ahead, hire them. And before you know it, they get the quantity is cut in half. But what happens? The work is still there. Now these people have budgeted for these. And again, you're dealing with older people that are on fixed incomes that they can only spend, they budgeted $50,000 for this entire project. Now that project went from $2 million to $20 million. What happens? So again, like you said, planning, budgeting, doing the right things is extremely important.
So Jeremy, while I have you on here, what technologies or innovations are improving restoration accuracy and efficiencies?
The engineering firms that have been doing this for a very long time. That's the truth. The board's willing to spend the money on swinging the entire building, right? That's where the misconception, and that's where Misha and James were saying earlier, right? Are you wanting us, how much do you want to spend? And that's where the dollar value, where the value engineering really comes in. M2E is at $100,000 for engineering firm. Why? Because they're planning on swinging and marking every single drop of that building. That also helps the board to budget properly better, because you're going to have your contingency that James was saying 20% is going to drop down dramatically, because now they actually were able to get their hands on the building. You do have drones and some infrared kind of stuff, but you don't really, it's hard to see. I mean, I was at a trade show out in Orlando where there's this new upcoming company that's doing infrared drones on the exterior building. But what happens if the building is wet? If the sun's hitting it a certain way, those readings are going to be completely off. So I don't know yet, and maybe Misha can speak on this, but I think it's still going to be the old-fashioned way. You got to get your hands on the building.
It's still the old-fashioned way. I just wanted to quantify by saying we don't necessarily need to do every single drop of the building. We take representative exposure drops so that we can get statistically significant sampling that we feel comfortable recommending something. As far as technologies go, sorry AI, there is no such thing as an engineer that is in your computer. We need to put our arms around the building. We need to sound, and sounding, there is only certain techniques that are possible in order to know what is going on. Where technology starts playing a role is the way that we harvest those data and how we present them back. And there is efficiencies and quality that can be improved through newer technologies. But fortunately for me and these professions of ours, there is still no robot that does what we do, and there is no substitution for an experienced professional looking at your building and properly scoping the work and telling you the truth.
Yeah. I did have a question from the chat I want to bring up. Jeremy, can you explain what is the official definition of a change order?
Well, so, and I'll let Misha and also James jump on this as well. First of all, us as contractors, well, I can only speak for our company, correct? We don't get paid for work that we don't submit a change order. So we can't just start doing the work because we decided to do so. It has to come from the owner's rep and the engineering firm. So if they mark out that small area, and let's say they quantify it's 100 square feet, and in the bid form, it's 100 square feet of work that needs to be done for the entire building. As soon as we exceed that amount, that is a change order, right? An unforeseen change order is where the engineer of record, what we said earlier, where they decided to shave off quantities and shave off scope of work. And James also mentioned, creating the proper bid form where everything needs to get done. That's where the change orders come in. And that's where the unforeseen, well, it's not on the bid list. Okay, well, that's where the contractor has the power to, hopefully not, but give an astronomical number. Well, it's not part of our bid. We're going to go and charge you X and Y and Z. But again, if we exceed the square footage and the quantities that were provided to us as contractors, that's consists of a change order, or something that was not on the bid form is considered a change order as well.
A simple explanation is the language of the AIA, right, Jeremy? It's essentially there is three ways of changing of doing so-called change of the work. The so-called change of the work can be done based on a directive, which is a change construction directive, which basically, if that's in the contract, the engineer or the architect gives a contractor a direction to do certain things and will get the pricing later. That's rarely happening because no contractor believes engineers and architects on their face value. The other way, and by the way, change order is for time and for money. Let's clarify that. At the end of every change order, there is a stipulation of does that change order make the price go up or down, and does it push the completion day back or forth? And you need to be careful in reading that because that should be part of your change order. Therefore, a change order is a formal way of saying what the contract defined initially, and that's where the appendix of your contract is, which is your contract documents, is this is the building, that's what you should do. Based on those documents, which is the quality bidding document that James compiles, he went to bid, he went to market. And only what is defined in those drawings and specifications is what Jeremy and the contractor will bid on. Anything that is not in there and that is not outlined in there is a change order, which is why it is important to have a good baseline, because that minimizes the change order that will occur in the future.
Thank you. And James, I did have a question, James, that came in from registration, which also ties into a question from the chat. So the one from the registration was from Lisa. Why should an association hire an owner's rep when you have an engineer and a general contractor? And the one from the chat wants you to explain the difference between an owner's rep and a property manager.
A property manager or a project manager?
A property manager. What's the difference between a project manager or owner's rep versus a property manager on site? You know, what is how do you differentiate their roles?
Got it. Okay. Before I respond to that real quick, just back on the change order thing, to simplify it even further, a change order is basically a change from the original contract, like Misha stated. And yes, it could affect money and it could affect time, but I do want to say this, not always a bad thing, guys. And by the way, it's not the contractor's fault if you get change orders. The contractor agreed to perform a certain amount of work for a certain dollar value within a certain amount of time. If that scope of work wasn't defined properly, and they have to do the work while they're there, well, what do you think they're going to do? Do it for free? No, they have to do it. It's not their fault. They contracted for a specific scope, time, and money, and obviously that portion wasn't identified previously. And the reason why I say it's not always a bad thing is because if the client is prepared from a financial perspective in their budget, sometimes you have alternates in the budget, which when a change order comes into play, you're financially prepared for those specific change orders. Those are things that you can get ahead of. Anyway, switching topics to your question, Millie. So why does a client need an owner rep if they have an engineer? Well, owner representation and engineers are two completely different set of services. If you, the owner, wish to receive all the information provided by the engineering firm relative to bid documents, specifications, permitting, concrete administration services that they, construction administration services that they perform, reports and all that. If you are willing and able to receive that information and understand it and make decisions or suggestions to the rest of the board on behalf of your entire community, then maybe you don't need an owner rep, right? Maybe then you can sit as not you per se, but that person can sit as the owner rep. But if you need somebody to sit in that chair and receive all the information from the engineer, from the contractors, somebody who has a high level of experience in this industry and can have intelligent debates about better means and methods, better approaches, maybe different ways to skin a cat, as they say, and find ways to save time, money, and so on, then you need that owner rep on board, among many other things, which I don't think we have the time for me to get into. But the other part is the difference between an owner rep project manager versus a property manager. Well, property managers are contractually obligated to manage the property and and or building on a day-to-day operational perspective, right? And trust me when I tell you, and I'm sure that anyone from Castle Group can attest to this, it's a full-time plus job, okay? And they're inundated with the day-to-day activities, people, personalities, internal politics within the community, and everything that goes along with running this mini city. They're busy managing the property. They really shouldn't cross over and attempt to manage the project. Something's got to give. They may get, burnt out. They may, their original job description may suffer, or vice versa, the project may suffer. Having that owner rep, that independent third-party construction professional representing your best interest is key to saving time, money, and aggravation. And I'll leave with this. I don't believe it's any different, having professional representation for a large capital improvement project. It's not really any different than having professional representation from a legal perspective, right? And just because you can represent yourself in a court of law doesn't mean you should, right? Just because you can represent yourself with a large-scale capital improvement project, 10, 20, 30, 40, $50 million, doesn't mean you should. Put the right professionals in place, it pays dividends.
In 30 seconds or less, James, what is the best way to manage expectations to the community?
Candid, clear communication. Do not just say what you think the community wants to hear.
Radical candor.
Yep.
Radical candor.
Yes.
Radical candor.
Because the last thing you want to do is just say what you think they want to hear just so you can get out of that meeting unscathed. You have to be candid and rip the Band-Aid off. That's the best way to do it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do want to thank everyone that joined us today and also the panel. I have the information on the screens in case you want to reach out to CARE Construction, M2E, or LGC. So again, thank you all for joining us today and wishing you a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you, Millie.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much,
everybody.
Millie, for putting
Thank
this
you, everybody.
together.
Thank you. Buddy.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.